Hello, everyone. Welcome to part 2 on our series on the An-2, the Anushka. Now, this aircraft is, like I said, quite an interesting one, and unfortunately, we have no automatic pilot, and the navigational technique is limited to NDP. Now, there is a variation you get when you buy this aircraft that includes a GPS. It's pretty handy, but if you want to get old school, we're going to get old school. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going from Omsk up to Tara, which is a little grass airfield. I love that airfield. It is literally in the middle of nowhere. And we're going to be going over kind of flying, navigating, kind of getting this thing around. So previously we've gotten everything all set up. Our instruments are set correctly. Our electronics are set correctly. Our lights are set correctly. Everything is completely ready to rock with this airplane. You know, it's rumbly. We were carrying plenty of combustibles on board and whatever these liters. No, we've got gas. I don't know. I'm just being a nerd. So what we're going to do today is we're going to make this little journey. Like I said, we're going to be traveling pretty good chunk of distance for this one. Don't worry, I will be skipping the trip from here and there, so just don't worry about that too much. So I'm going to flip on a couple little lights here, and I'm going to go ahead and get this thing rolling. So to drive this thing on the ground, it's pretty easy. First things first, remember, you're big. This thing weighs up to 12,000 pounds. This is a much, 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 much bigger aircraft than you think it is. Second thing is identify the direction of the wind and make sure you put your controls in that direction of the wind. In my case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do a big old 180. Listen to the brakes. Isn't that so satisfying? I love that. All right, we're just going to give it a tap of gas. I'm going to go ahead and crack the cow flaps open a little bit. Once we do start using our power here, we're going to make sure that everything is all set here. And again, it's pretty cold, so I'm not too worried about overheating, so I'll bring those in just a tiny bit here. I finally got smart and added a button on my controller because, like, I swear you have to use these things all the time. All right, let's get this thing rolling. Now, many of you are like, well, do you need to use takeoff flaps? You know, what's the technique here? The technique is don't taxi quickly, because if you do, you will go ahead and do a face plant when you stand on the brakes. This is a big aircraft, and it has a 1,000 horsepower radial engine hanging off with a gigantic propeller. For those of you who are VR fans, this thing runs beautifully in VR and has a really good field of view, which makes it very, very easy to control. So one of the things I like to do when I'm taxiing this guy is I like to keep this kind of back towards me, and you will see this aircraft pick up speed instantly. You turn away for a second, and all of a sudden you're going to be ripping down the runway here. So just kind of be mindful of that as you're operating it. Now, what they did do is, to help us out a little bit, is they gave us a steerable tail wheel. Now, I know that this aircraft does not have a steerable tail wheel, but it does make it a lot easier to be able to identify where we're going. Now, one thing I do in VR is I set up here, which from what I've seen in videos, this is a little bit more realistic. It really does help if you have a controller to go ahead and assign a button for the purposes. Again, hold that tail on the ground and go ahead and deflect your controls into the wind. You don't want this thing to kind of get away from you. As I'm taxiing around, things I want to look at, I want to see what my engine temperatures are. Like right now, I'm seeing they're about 150. Notice the generator just cut out, by the way. I pull the RPM back too far. There it goes. I'll pop the generator back in. Like I said, one of my favorite things that happened to me when I was first learning this plane was, of course, you'd be taxiing, all of a sudden your lights would all go off and your radio would cut out. And you're like, well, that wasn't very nice. It basically came down to the fact you were running on the battery because you're idling so low here. How you doing? Hey, how's it going? What's up? All right. Man, there's a lot of traffic at this airport. I'm literally in Omsk. I'm not exactly like, this isn't downtown Petersburg or something like that. All right, there we go. Let's go get lined up on the runway. So this aircraft has a relatively simple process for takeoff. It's basically full power. I hold this stick back a little tiny bit. Once you do get going, it goes pretty quick. This is not a long takeoff plane. You know, you're not taking an F-100 into the air or anything like that. This is a very, very, very high power to weight ratio, and it also has a tremendous amount of lift. Now, one of the things I was reading about this is people will describe it more of a kite than an airplane because of just how much lift it produces. And it also makes landing way more exciting for us. You know, when you cut the power on it, it's not like funk like a Cessna 182 or something like that. It really, really, really wants to go. All right, now we can normally do our run-up at this point. The run-up would include bringing us up to 2,000 RPM, giving everything a good exercise here, but I did that off camera and everything was running smoothly. We have real-world weather today, so I'm going to go ahead and bring myself over this way. And we're going to line ourselves up and straighten our tail wheel the best we can. And that's looking pretty good right there. Now, if this were the real plane, the next thing I would tell you to do is to flick the tail wheel lock switch. But because we have a steerable tail wheel, what's a wheel? It's wheels. You wouldn't have to do that here because unless it's really, really crosswindy, you're just not going to have a problem with that control of this aircraft. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and make sure everything's ready to go. Landing lights are going to come on. We're going to flip that on. Looks pretty good. Let's see here. Our initial heading today is going to be 78 magnetic. So I'm going to go ahead and now set this up just so I have it. Again, you're looking at the arrow there. So 78 magnetic. Looks like we're going to be taking a long banking left turn here. Oof. Okay. You know, I love it that you can zoom in with your mouse. I also love it how you can adjust your controls with your mouse. You get my feels. All right, that looks pretty good. Again, we're pointing that direction. Let's reset everything one more time. Make sure it's all looking pretty good. No autopilot on this. Nothing special. What we're going to do is we're going to... Oh, see that? See that? You see how it tried to get away? We're going to crack those cowl flaps open just a little more. It's pretty cold, so I'm not going to leave them open. All right, last thing we need to do is we need to confirm that our attitude indicators are set, which they are. Double check our pressure. Do we have fuel for the flight? My brakes are good. My altimeter is set correctly. My lights are all set. I've got my oil thing set. You're probably saying, do you need flaps? You could take up with 15 degrees of flaps if you needed. We don't need any cabin lighting. I'm not going to stress about that. Like I said, we could use this if we wanted, but we're not going to for today. All right, let's go. That's it. Airborne. Isn't that great? Oh, man, I love this. And keep in mind, I can fit like my immediate family in this thing. It's pretty impressive. I definitely see why they use it for skydivers. One thing I'm noticing is my engine's getting very warm. I'm actually going to crack that up. I have been complaining millions of years for people doing their default views like this. I'm going to do a default view like this, just so I can keep a crack on my engine there. One thing, of course, we could do is we could remove our little yoke there to make it a little bit easier to see. I'm not going to do that. I just don't need to do that today. But we are starting to... Yeah, temperature's actually pretty good. All right, so once we get in the air, we want to reduce our RPM first. It's a little different with this aircraft. If you never go past 2,000 RPM, you will never have problem with engine destruction with this plane and other simulators here. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll put it to like 1,959 RPM or something really silly like that. And the other thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and back the throttle up just a little bit. We'll come down to 10. That's 1,000 inches of mercury as far as our pressure goes. And then we'll go ahead and execute that right turn towards our first position. Now, climb on this one is relatively straightforward because you have so much power on this aircraft. You'd be amazed at how quick you'll get this thing to get airborne. A lot of times what you can do, especially if you know you have a long flight and you're worried about fuel, you can really back the power up to probably about 900 millimeters and probably about 1,900 RPM if you're looking for a little bit easier climb. But for us, we're just going to kind of keep it simple here. Generally, climb speeds, you want to stay out of the white arc and you don't want to be in the yellow arc. So like I said, I usually do about 150 to 160, 170, somewhere in there for kilometers an hour. Keep in mind, deck angle is a real thing that you have to be concerned about in a real plane. Keeping an eye on my temps, I could probably crack the things down a little bit. In the real world, of course, once you crack those things open as wide as you do, you run the risk of snapping them off, which you definitely don't want to do at specific speeds. All right, we are looking pretty good here. I'm actually going to come to my right just a little bit in a moment. Yeah, looks pretty good. All right, swing around. There's the lovely city of Omsk right over my left there. And one of the things I just love about this part of this country is it's so flat. It's mind-bogglingly flat outside. It's just kind of one of those things. All right, we'll kind of come swing to the left here. We got a pretty good climb on. We don't need to go terribly high today. We'll kind of level off about this heading. It's pretty good. Now, one of the things that you'll find very, very interesting is just how far our instruments have changed. So if I actually were to come down here and press and hold my heading reference, it's going to tell me, oh, you're going this distance, you're going this distance, you're going that distance, all these kind of things. But these will drift on you, so definitely keep an eye on them as you're making your journey along this piece. Another thing that makes this a particularly interesting flight for us is the fact that we're so high up in our latitude that it actually makes it difficult to use a magnetic compass. Basically, every time you go over another 60 miles, you go at several degrees over. It creates such an interesting problem. All right, we're looking pretty good right now, about 900 millimeters of mercury right now. That's not too bad for us. And about 2,000 RPM. We're doing just fine here. All right, it's looking pretty good. Now we're coming up to, we got about 1,000 meters. We're going to level off at 1,500 meters. Like I said, if it's a nice and hot day, don't be afraid to kind of crack open those cowl flaps open. Right now, we're looking at about 190 degrees Celsius. That's plenty. That's obviously, we could close it a little bit. My oil temperatures are just a tiny bit warmer than I like them to be. But it's not going to be that much of a problem because in just a moment we're going to level off and it'll cool everything down for us really, really nicely. There we go. Swing to my left just a little bit. I just realized I did a calculation wrong a minute ago. My actual heading is roughly north. 78 magnetic is not the same thing as 78 true because of how close we are up on the poles here. And again, it's just one of those things I always forget about. All right, let's go ahead and level this beast down and let's get ready for cruise mode. I love the trim on this plane. This is one of the few planes in Flight Sim that they get the trim right. It's really a press and hold, like just like in a real plane kind of a thing. It's not twitchy, it's not accelerating, it just goes. And we'll go ahead and bring ourselves left just a little bit here. Like I said, about 1,500 meters is perfectly fine for us in our little journey here. All right, I like that, just about there. Nice. Beautiful. Whoop. Even more down trim. All right, we picked up enough speed. Let's go ahead and get ourselves in a cruise. There are many, many different ways to cruise. Hold on just a second. So when we go to set up our cruise, there's a couple different settings we can use. Believe it or not, the book gives us a maximum continuous range that we can actually operate at. And that max continuous is actually a higher power than I can actually achieve right now, which is just mind-boggling. We could do 2,000 and we could do 900 millimeters right now, which would give us a very, very high-speed cruise for this aircraft. By the way, now that we're building up some speed here, I'm actually going to close the cowl flaps even more. I always like to leave them cracked open just a little bit, but I always keep my eye down on the temperatures to see exactly what's going on there. All right, nose down, speed up. You'll find this one a little tricky to go ahead and get trimmed. It just wants to fly, and you'll know what I mean once you start operating it. All right, we've got ourselves nice and leveled off there. Everything's looking pretty good. Now, if we wanted to go to a more economy cruise, let's say we wanted to save a little bit of fuel, especially seeing as we're in the yellow right now, we can actually back this down. You can see that gets me to about 800 millimeters of mercury. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see there. About 800 millimeters of mercury. And when it comes to RPM, watch this. And there you go. 800 millimeters of mercury coupled with 1,600 RPM gets us a cruise speed of about 115 knots. That is absolute maximum economy cruise. Now, if you want to go all the way, by the way, you can actually come over here and you can lean the mixture out just a teeny tiny bit there, which will go ahead and give us a even leaner cruise that actually save us a bit of fuel. Now, if you're wondering, how much fuel am I burning right now? You're still burning about 50 gallons per hour. So again, this is a big engine. So even at 200 horsepower, you are really, really, really ripping through the fuel supplies here. So what I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and cancel that effect out, and we'll pick a cruise kind of in the middle there. I'll go ahead and put the mixture back to what it needs to be. I will leave that in the green, but I'll go ahead and give us a couple RPM. Look at how far back to handle this for RPM, by the way. Come up to 1,800. Yeah, it's now a little past 1,800. I don't need that many. 1,800, 1,808. That's usually the one that I used to use all the time. It's kind of like a nice kind of balanced cruise. Again, increasing the RPM is just going to give you a little bit more speed at a cost of a lot more noise in the cabin. All right, now it's time to do some navigation. So one of the things I had mentioned is we're kind of high up in the latitudes, which means our magnetic course and our true course will not agree with each other. And one of the things that's great about this particular aircraft is we can dial in a specific course into this unit, even though that might not agree with the magnetic course. Just because, like, if you look right now, check a look at this. Look at this. Our magnetic course is 60 degrees. Our true course right now is basically north. So to give you an idea just how far up we are. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to freeze the simulation. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at the arc. Now, this is an old school ADF. It's basically an old style. It's very, very straightforward. And these kind of spaces where you have literally thousands and thousands of miles, potentially between different airports, you need to have systems that work and they're reliable. And one of the common ways they did it was non-directional beacons. So for us here, we have two different frequencies that we can select from. We have the kind of the inner marker, then we have what they call the outer. We have the B and the D, if you want to think about it sort of another way. This little green light here tells you what current NDB you are trying to read from. This light's on, you're going to be listening to, like I said, this is the inner. If you switch over this button right here, you're going to be going over to the outer, which is going to read it. Now, what you probably noticed is the moment I flipped over to this outer channel here on channel 680 here, you notice that this big old instrument down here, this is my, look at this thing go. You can see, I love how it says, let's see, R-A-D-I, it's a radio compass. Radio compass. I love it. You can see it's pointing behind me because that's roughly where that station is. The other thing you're going to notice is this needle going, whoa! This guy is telling us how strong our frequency is. You can tell that on the 680 channel, which, by the way, is right from where we took off, in case you were curious, we have a pretty good strength. The other thing you're going to notice is up at the tippy top, you actually have multiple switches here. If I switch to this side, this is going to be antenna mode, ANT here. And comp mode is basically automatic. The way this would work is, I recommend, by the way, please use comp mode. There's no reason to use ANT mode. But the way this would work is you'd switch to ANT mode, and then what you would do is you'd have this little needle, and what you'd do is you drive this thing left and right to try to get a direct lock on the signal. And what you would do is you'd watch this needle swing around, and you'd hope that this needle here would deflect as far to the right as possible. And basically you come a little to the right, and you'd be like, oh, I'm getting stronger signal, a little to the left, I'm getting slightly weaker signal, and you basically fits with this knot up until this needle was at a particular heading, and this was maximum. Didn't model that for us, which is kind of I don't know. It kind of bums me out a little bit. I kind of like playing with that. But if you switch to comp mode, you'll be fine. So when it comes to tuning frequencies on this thing, it's a little bit of a pain in the butt. First of all, you have to know what your frequency is. And second of all, you got to tune it. So let's say I had a frequency of 555. So what I would do is I grab this big ring on the outside. I go ahead and crank this. So we can pop this to 5. We can go and grab this middle one. We can pop this one to 5. Now here's the hard part. We got to take this guy and we actually got to put him right on 5. Now I hate to say this, but you're going to struggle to get the exact position. And unfortunately, in the real world, if you were close enough, like this needle would start deflecting to tell you actually have an electrical signal that we can use, but it's not going to work. It has to be exact, otherwise you won't actually get any readings at all. To give you an idea of that, if we look at this one real quick, do you see how I'm on 6800? Watch this. Did you see 6801 or 681 immediately drops out? Now if I go back to 680, you'll see that this needle starts, woo, does this little happy dance here. So now that you know how to tune this thing, let's go ahead and get an actual signal here. We're going to 740 today, which is going to take us right up by Terra. Go ahead and drop this to 0, and you'll notice nothing happened here because we're still on the other beacon. We'll click that switch there, and we're probably not going to pick up anything. We're a very, very long distance away from 740 right now. We probably have, I don't know, I think it's like 60, 70 miles before we're actually going to be picking this one up. So don't panic. I will do a little bit of skip trip. So once we get to that position, we'll go ahead and take a look at that part of the navigation. Finally, we're starting to get a taste. Let's see. So if you take a look now down at my control instruments, you'll see that I'm starting to get this, our little needle here telling us where the NDB is starting to sweep in the same direction. The other thing I'll probably notice is if I look up, you can actually see that that little antenna that tells me how much strength I have is starting to actually deflect towards the right. That means we can start doing our navigational components here. Now, if I take a look down here, you'll see we actually have 2 copies of this needle telling us where the NDB is. We have that one there, and then we have this really big one that's actually down here as well. So one of the troubles with NDBs, and anybody who's done any fun stuff with instrument flying knows that if I point directly at that particular station, what's going to happen is that if there's any sort of crosswind, it'll actually knock it off course, and we end up what they call homing versus crabbing. Now, one of the things I've done is spent the last few moments after capturing that signal is playing the can I get that needle to kind of center on one number and stay on their game. And I basically got it to do this. So believe it or not, even though the NDB, the actual beacon itself, is probably somewhere over in that direction, we can't actually point at it because the wind would send us to the right. There is no VOR receiver on this aircraft. We don't have any TACAN. And unfortunately, a lot of the really cool West Eastern systems, such as Shoran, their version of it, and NCNS, which is a Doppler navigation, we don't have that yet. So it's actually kind of a bummer in that regard. But you can see that we're still able to just kind of keep an eye on that. And of course, if we had the chap in the overseat here, they could let us know just how far off. And yes, the needle is going to sweep everywhere, and it's going to be very difficult to read. That's just the nature of what it does. It's just, like I said, in my mind, to me, that's part of the fun. It's not something that's, oh, we shouldn't fly this. And again, there is a GPS version of this aircraft that you can operate that will, of course, a lot of these sort of problems won't be there because you can just follow the magenta line of safety. Other navigational options with this aircraft, of course, include anything that you like to do with a traditional dead reckoning if you need to. Pilotage works great because you have this great glazed window. You can actually look out and you see this window is actually tipped out, which makes it possible to look straight down below us, making it very, very easy to spot things if we're doing any sort of a navigation using that technique. Now, speaking of spotting things, we're going to be landing on a snowfield pretty soon here, so it's going to be kind of interesting to see if we can actually locate it. I've done my calculations here, and basically, once we cross the NDB, it's another 40 miles, which is going to be a little while. Now, while you're traveling here and you're kind of enjoying your flight, every once in a while, you want to periodically double-check to make sure your instruments are lined up correctly. So one of the things I see here is my little attitude indicator. It's drifting slightly left here. I'm not drifting. It's drifting. I can tell because I'm looking out the window. No, you got me. It was me drifting. But you do want to keep an eye on that instrument from time to time, which we'll have to do a straight level. Pull this out to lock it, level yourself off, and then basically pop it back in and hope that you got that correct. Because if that's tilted now, you're still going to be tilted when you untilt it. So again, welcome to Classic Instruments. This one as well, because of the way we did it earlier, we push that button in, we make our adjustment, pull it out, or you can hit the D key, again, D, and we're all set, kind of a thing like that. All right, so as you can see, the navigation is relatively straightforward. Operating this thing on a flight is relatively straightforward. I can see my engines are positively, absolutely freezing right now, and I literally can't close my cowl flaps anymore. Look at this. We're like 150. That's nothing. That's nothing. One thing we should do, of course, is we can consider leaning out the mixture here a little bit. The way you would normally lean this one out is you do it by ear, which is very, very challenging for us. It's extra challenging for me because I'm on mute right now, so you can imagine what that's going to be like. But basically what you would do is you'd push this until the engine started running a little on the rough side, and then you pull it back a little bit. The other method, of course, we could use is we could go ahead and pop the mixture a little bit and watch our cylinder head temperature rise. And in the real aircraft, this would be a very surefire method of determining just how lean the actual mixture is, so we could be able to predict what it's going to do. In our next video, we're going to show you how to kind of run around a traffic pattern with this thing and the very, very awkward landing sequence, which requires us to come in kind of flat. And you'll see what I mean. Enjoy.